what really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Thursday, December 27th, 2018. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We've got a lot to talk about today. A lot's going on in the world. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. That's 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments, questions, opinions, and so forth and so on. Boy, what a wild ride on the stock markets today. Opened down, went way down. The Dow actually touched 600 down at one point. And then, miracle of miracles, Santa Claus showed up and actually got it shoved 200 points into the green. And I'm sure a lot of people are thinking, it's the plunge protection team. Looking at the volume indicators, yeah, somebody came on in and just started buying like crazy to drive that market up. I don't think they can keep up this juggling act, though. I really do not. Okay, let's get into the conflict areas here, because there's a lot going on with conflict here. Apparently, Iran is now holding talks with the Afghan Taliban following the U.S. announcement of a partial troop withdrawal. And the Secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, Ali Shamkhani, announced on a visit to the Afghan capital of Kabul that Iranian officials have met with the Afghan Taliban. That's going to make a lot of people very nervous about what's going on. And this came just days after the Taliban attended peace talks in the United Arab Emirates with U.S. officials. And representatives from the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan were also present. So apparently they're holding peace talks about how to wind this thing down here. And I'm sure from the U.S. point of view, they're going to say, look, you could run your country any way you want to. We only insist on three things. We want that oil pipeline right of way. We want access to the oil itself, of course. And we still got to get that opium flowing on out there to keep the American drug lords happy and pharmaceutical companies. But I repeat myself here. So there are peace talks going on. And if this is legit and not a feint of some kind, and of course it's really hard to know, Trump does appear to be keeping one of his most important campaign promises from back in 2016. He's trying to get us out of some of these wars that the United States is mired in all over the world. And I would like to point out that at least so far, Trump has not started any new wars. So we'll hope he stays on that track here. Over in Syria, apparently the al-Qaeda-linked Wahid al-Mu'minin operations room conducted a hit-and-run attack on several positions of the Syrian Arab Army in northern Latakia. And according to pro-militant sources, over 20 Syrian Arab soldiers were killed. Now, another version of the events claims that the SSA repelled the attack in the villages of Nakshiba, Rusat al-Malik, and Ain el-Quatra, killing most of the attackers. So, apparently, large numbers of Syrian troops have been deployed near Manbij, where U.S. forces, as of last report, are still located. Now, here is where it gets interesting. The southeast Syrian rebels are ready to surrender after the U.S. pullout from Tanf base, and their commanders are in talks with the Syrian government to try and negotiate a safe passage to the north. And may work, may not. If they were trying to just leave the country, I think Assad would say, sure, you're going to be out here. But they could be going north to join with the Kurds in the northeast of Syria, which would lead Assad in a position to say, yeah, you've got safe passage, and then pull a highway of death on them, which is what the United States did to retreating Iraqi troops during the Iraq War. Bombed vehicles at the head and end of the convoy to lock everything in place and just torched everything. I think that qualifies as a war crime here. All right, the United Nations has been presented with evidence that the white helmets were not what the corporate media told us. They weren't humanitarian, they weren't rescuers, and the UN was presented with evidence about staged attacks, which we all know that's what they were doing, criminal activities, working with terrorists, apparently even organ theft, stealing from civilians, and all this other behavior. And of course, the corporate media, which sold us that image of the white helmets as being real, that they're the good guys. You know, you just follow them along and don't ever think they would do something like stage a false flag attack. Corporate media, of course, is ignoring the presentation to the United Nations because they don't want to have to turn around and say, okay, we were wrong about the white helmets, because then everybody else starts saying, well, what else have you been wrong about these many years, as it were. Now, as U.S. forces get ready to retreat from Syria or pull out from Syria, I'm not going to use the word retreat, I'll get the war hawks angry at me. Apparently, Turkish-backed fighters are preparing to take their place. And Turkey is apparently planning to invade in the course of this replacement and wants to get those Syrian Kurds and basically resolve that situation. Now, Russia has issued a warning to Turkey not to invade. So Russia is flexing its muscle, and we'll see just how crazy Erdogan is really going to turn on out. Down in Saudi Arabia, there's been a shakeup of the government. King Solomon ordered the reshuffle earlier today. He's appointed a new foreign minister. He's turning over other top posts. And this is all from the fallout over the killing of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Foreign Minister Adel Al-Jubeir was demoted to Minister of State for Foreign Affairs and replaced by a veteran former Finance Minister Ibrahim Al-Assaf. This came about by royal decree. King Solomon also named Prince Abdullah bin Bandar, who's the son of Prince Bandar al-Saud, who was once the Saudi ambassador to Washington. He's the new head of the National Guard, and they're hiring additional security intelligence officials. Now, Al-Jubeir has previously said Khashoggi's killing was a tremendous mistake. Now, in an interview last October, he said that the Washington Post columnist's death was the result of a rogue operation and that the Saudi government will punish those who are responsible. Of course, our media and our government are saying, well, it had to be Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. It wouldn't have happened without there. That remains to be seen. But it turns out that apparently Khashoggi was acting as a foreign influence agent inside the United States at the Washington Post itself. And his agenda was to change U.S. policy against Saudi Arabia and in favor of the Muslim Brotherhood. And apparently they were working for Qatar. Now, the Washington Post actually admitted this in a pre-Christmas Saturday news dump, but alert people picked up on it, and it's gone viral all over the web. Apparently, text messages between Khashoggi and an executive at Qatar Foundation International show the executives at times shaped the columns he submitted to the Washington Post, proposing topics, drafting material, and prodding him to take a hard line against the Saudi government. So Khashoggi wasn't as squeaky clean as a lot of people tried to make on out. All right, let's talk about the Yellow Vests. We're coming up here on another weekend. There's probably going to be more of these protests. There's a lot of concern being expressed about this secret weapon deployed by the police that blows this powder that is incapacitating at the Yellow Vest protesters. And nobody knows what it is, whether it's just a more concentrated form of CS tear gas or if it's something completely new. But the police aren't saying. They're just using it. Now, a lot of people are looking at the Yellow Vests and saying this could be the beginning of a populist uprising. And apparently the corporate media is trying to push back and saying that the Yellow Vests have got nothing to do with the rise of the right in Europe. And this journalist and author Gilbert Mercier in a Sputnik interview, said that the Yellow Vest proposed citizens' initiative referendum may pave the way for the rise of a French Sixth Republic, where the people of France will finally be heard by their government. He's actually acknowledged we could be looking at the beginning of a real revolution, hopefully a non-violent one. But the Yellow Vest protesters are demanding this referenda initiative, which is a push to bring back democracy, to allow the French people to themselves propose laws to go on the ballots. And that's a really, really good idea. Poor Emmanuel Macron, it seems the damage is done, and these days there isn't anything that he does that isn't going to be criticized or made fun of. Apparently, during his pre-Christmas visit to Kosei Air Base near Chad's capital, Macron brought along champagne, foie gras, and chocolate to share a holiday meal with 1,300 troops. Now, setting aside the cruelty involved in making foie gras, that's a really nice thing for him to have done. And yet on Twitter, there have been comments out there about, let them eat cake. So the damage is done. I don't think Macron is going to recover from this no matter what he does. Now, here's an interesting question being posed by Sputnik News, because the Yellow Vests are demanding French President Macron resign, and they're unlikely to succeed unless they have backers within France's political circles. This is coming from Italian journalist Daniele Posati. And he's basically saying there may well be elements, I'm sure there are, within the French government who would like Macron to go. They think it's a time for a change of leadership. Now, last October, there'd been a whole series of resignations at the highest level of French government. It had left Macron struggling to fill vacancies due to the reluctance of French senior politicians to associate their names with what they see as his doomed presidency. And this all happened before the Yellow Vests movement even started up. Okay. Getting on back down to Syria. Syria, of course, has strongly condemned Israel's recent missile strike near the capital as a blatant violation of a United Nations resolution, adding that Tel Aviv would not have been able to carry out such attacks without support from the United States. Normally, I would go along with that and say, yes, I agree. But at this point, looking at Netanyahu's situation, I think he's perfectly capable of just going off and acting unilaterally. So, Syria's foreign ministries accused Israel of seeking to prolong the crisis in Syria, noting that such strikes are tantamount to what ISIS and other terrorist groups are doing in Syria. And Syria is once again petitioning the Security Council to fulfill its responsibilities to keep international peace. Good luck when it comes to Israel. Now, Syria is reporting that of all the missiles that Israel's F-16s fired into their country, 86% were successfully intercepted and destroyed before they reached their targets. And this is without the benefit of the Russian S-300 system, which is not quite online just yet here. There's another story floating around, I could not confirm, saying that the missiles fired in retaliation by Syria into Israel actually did a lot of damage, and Israel has imposed military censorship to keep that from getting on out. So truth indeed is the first casualty of war. Now, as you know, Israel, the Knesset has been dissolved. Netanyahu is calling for snap elections. They're going to be in April. And he's already out there trying to win back some of the popularity he's lost. And so he's basically given a gift to the settler movement, 2,200 new illegally constructed homes in the occupied West Bank. And the plans have already been approved earlier this week. And they're going to just start building on stolen land here. Now, last week, the Israeli government raided a law firm linked to Israel's Mossad intelligence agency to pressure a U.S.-based fundraising platform to ban BDS from using its services. So you can almost feel the panic. Now, over in the West Bank, the European Union's policing operation is being investigated for fraud. And apparently a few days before they were going to shut down for the Christmas break, an anti-fraud office called OLAF came on in and conducted a search, quizzed some staff, took various documents and electronic equipment away for further inspection. Now, the investigation has been unreported until now. This is not the first time the EU's policing operation has been under suspicion. 2 years ago, in December of 2016, the Union's diplomatic service opened a probe into claims of nepotism and harassment in the operations headquarters. It's like nothing's really working over there. Things are about to get tense in the Sea of Azov. As you know, Poroshenko has said they're going to send more warships through the Kerch Strait. They're not going to ask for permission. They're treating it as a freedom of navigation exercise and arbitrarily saying the Sea of Azov is international waters. And Poroshenko is calling on NATO to go along with them. Now, Russia has already dispatched a guided missile cruiser into the Sea of Azov to have some muscle. And now Moscow is calling on Ukraine and all of the Western partners to abandon this new plan to send naval warships through the Kerch Strait. Now, Maria Zakharova, who's the spokesperson for the Russian Foreign Ministry, called the possible passage a reckless initiative. She's got that one correct here. And Zakharova noted that the Western supervisors of Kiev, she knows who's really the boss, should come up with a way of reasoning with the ruling regime in Ukraine in order to make them abandon the steps that could lead to escalation in the region. And she finished by saying that apparently the utter failure of Kiev's last attempt to breach the Kerch Strait has not taught them a lesson. Alrighty, down in the South China Sea, apparently China has installed a new facility in the Paracel Islands of the South China Sea. Satellite images revealing Beijing's continuing quest for power in the disputed area. Recent satellite imagery shows a new structure which appears to be anchored on the north edge of the Bombay Reef with solar panels and a radome. So they basically are putting up a long-range radar there, and according to the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative, the dome appears to be an Ocean E station, a component of a larger Blue Ocean information network which China is developing to aid its exploration, exploitation, and control of the region. And looking at the dates of the satellite images, the dome was set up sometime between April and July of this year. Well, China's going to market. As you know, they have this Mach 6 anti-ship missile, and they're willing to sell it to other countries who need to basically have ways to deter invasion. And China is describing it as intended for rapid and precision strikes against medium-sized ships, naval task forces, and offshore facilities. And according to the Chinese, the CM-401, that's the hypersonic missiles designation, is fitted with a terminal radar guidance unit featuring a nose-mounted gimbal antenna. Once launched, the missile flies along a ballistic trajectory, reaching near space altitude. The weapon has an average speed of Mach 4, and during the dive to terminal phase, a peak of Mach 6. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about what's going on in the various conflict areas. Now, North and South Korea had a groundbreaking ceremony for a project to link their railway and road networks. They actually broke ground and they may actually move ahead with linking the railways and the roads. But until the sanctions are lifted, they can't be used. Unless the two Koreas simply announce we're reunified now, which would obsolete the U.S. agenda in North Korea, because now we'd be all one Korea. But clearly, Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in think putting the country back together again is a really good idea. And the United States, of course, does not want that to happen. Now, we're starting to hear the repercussions from the Pentagon's audit fiasco. And Patrick Shanahan, who's the current Deputy Secretary of Defense, said, yeah, it's only a few $1 trillion. It's ridiculous. And this appears to be prompting a lot of anger among ordinary Americans. And over at VidRebel, they're talking, there's a very angry article about how the military stealing money from the voters, it can't last much longer. And I'm in agreement with that. Setting aside the risk of a nuclear war, which Putin is now saying, yes, he thinks that the U.S. is going to get into a nuclear war with Russia. We're out of money. We are flat out of money. Most Americans are hanging on by their fingernails. They're one disaster away from homelessness. And the government is just taking the tax money and they're pouring it all over the war machine, all over the illegal immigrants, the refugees. The refugees are being treated better than our veterans. It's a national disgrace. It really, really is. All right. Russia held a successful test of their new hypersonic glider, the Avangard. And basically, the way the missile is configured, it has a traditional ballistic missile booster that boosts it in a high ballistic path, and then the glider glides on down, and it is maneuverable. And that means that the entire U.S. ballistic missile defense system is totally obsolete because it's built around a doctrine of a predictable inbound ballistic path. So they had this successful test here, and already we're hearing voices coming from the Pentagon saying, oh, it's not that impressive. It's not a big a deal, but can we have money to make one for ourselves? But apparently, it can travel at a top speed of Mach 20. Actually, there's in Rosia TV channel reported it can travel 27 Mach. That's actually above orbital speed. So they had a successful test. It's a real weapon now. Now, as you know, Donald Trump did something very cool. He went to visit the troops in Iraq. Of course, he didn't tell them he was going to bring them home, but they got to meet him, and it was a good time. He took Melania out, and apparently a lot of the soldiers had Make America Great Again hats and an embroidered patch that read Trump 2020. And President Donald Trump made himself available to sign the hats and the patches. But apparently some of the officers in the chain of command are saying that these autographs potentially violate Department of Defense guidelines for political activities. Come on, guys. These are soldiers in the field. This is the commander-in-chief. Lighten the heck up. All right? Now, President Trump and First Lady Melania stopped at Ramstein Air Base in Germany on their way back to Washington, D.C., where he held some high-level meetings with key military generals aboard Air Force One. So, turning a little closer to home here, apparently the deep state is in a panic with the idea that Mattis is stepping down. Now, Mattis was supposed to be out the end of February, but in a snit he said he's leaving basically next week. And Trump is saying he's not in a hurry to find a replacement. We still don't know who's going to be nominated. There's a lot of speculation about that. There are two camps with two different sets of potential candidates for Secretary of Defense. Unfortunately, they're all maximum war hawks. We got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, and we're talking about SecDef Mattisy stepping down. The corporate media is having cows, and basically the concern in this article, which came out of Zero Hedge, is that all of the leading candidates to replace him are also war hawks. And I think that if Trump is serious about starting to pull us out of some of these engagements, that he needs a Secretary of Defense who is less aggressive and more tuned in with the needs of our soldiers in the field, logistics, the practical considerations of moving large forces across the globe. So apparently, Fox News is saying the most likely candidates for Secretary of Defense are Senator Tom Cotton, Republican of Arizona, and retired General John Jack Keane. And Tom Cotton, when he was a senator, gained a reputation for being extraordinarily hawkish, particularly regarding Iran. And he was a critic of the Iran nuclear deal. And Cotton was one of the authors of a controversial letter to Iran during the negotiations that was described by the Baltimore Sun as telling Tehran to prepare for war because the agreement could be nullified by the subsequent president, which is exactly what happened. Cotton is also calling on Congress to supply Israel with B-52s and bunker buster bombs to use against Iran. Iran hasn't done anything except to not obey orders here. Now, as for Keane, who's often referred to simply as Jack, he's a frequent commenter on Fox News, and he's been described by Ray McGovern as the go-to general for the neoconservatives, which is unsurprising given his close association with the influential neoconservative Kagan clan that includes Fred Kagan, Robert Kagan, and their wives Kimberly and Victoria Newland. So she's cropped up again here. So this is not looking like a good change here. Okay, getting back to our local politics here. And apparently there is a lot of stuff going on back in Arkansas. It's not being covered in the corporate media, but apparently there have actually been some arrests and indictments coming out of Arkansas. And the source for this are press releases from the Justice Department. And the Arkansas swamp is getting little or no coverage in the corporate media. Of course, none of the swamps get covered in the corporate media. So anybody who thinks the Clintons aren't still involved in Arkansas, you're dreaming here. All right. John McCain's ties to the Christopher Steele dossier have come to light, and it doesn't look good. Now, we already reported on this back when the dossier first surfaced. There had been a report that John McCain was part of the conduit by the internet connection was lost. I'm hearing sound coming from RBN, though. Can you hear me, Mike?
Yeah, I got you now.
Okay, well, I don't know what's going on with Twitch, but it's sending me all kinds of bogus. Apparently our YouTube video feed also went down. So this is Spectrum. Somebody pulled a wire over at Spectrum. Man, oh man. All right, so we're talking about John McCain. We're talking about his links to the Christopher Steele dossier. He was briefed by Christopher Steele in London in 2016. The Russian dossier was paid for by the Democratic National Committee and Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. It is a worthless piece of junk. Nothing in it has been corroborated, especially that story about Trump and the two prostitutes doing terrible things to a bed in a hotel. But they used it as evidence to go before FISA to get warrants so they could spy on Trump volunteers and staff and make it look quasi-legal. Kramer then returned back to the U.S. and delivered the dossier to John McCain. McCain handed the dossier over to the FBI. So there's the chain of cover-up, as it were. Okay, Vanity Fair is reporting that Joe Biden is apparently upset that Obama is paying more attention to Beto O'Rourke than to him. Now, as you know, both Beto and Joe are considering runs in 2020, and Joe Biden, having been Obama's vice president, I think the expectation was that Obama would support him. But apparently, Biden is kind of upset about this. Now, a Biden spokesman said, no, that's absolutely not true. These are just rumors, and there's nothing going on here. And a lot of people are saying that Obama is simply unwilling to take sides so early after the way the road was cleared for Hillary in 2016, despite her unpopularity. And by the way, speaking of Hillary, right now, among all potential candidates for the Democratic nomination in 2020, Hillary Clinton is polling dead last. Please get the message, Hillary. We're tired of you. We are really tired of you. Now, here's a good one, speaking of Hillary Clinton. Good old Judicial Watch. Man, they are doing such good work over there. They're having to pry these documents out of the government with crowbars, even though these are supposed to be public records here. But Judicial Watch announced that it obtained more than 100 pages of previously classified secret documents from the Department of Defense and the Department of State, revealing that the Department of Defense almost immediately reported the attack on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi was committed by the Al-Qaeda and Muslim Brotherhood-linked brigades of the captive Omar Abdul Rahman. Now, remember when Hillary was telling everybody that it was just a mass uprising over an offensive YouTube video, which turned out to be an offensive YouTube trailer for which there was no video? And that's not the best part. The best part is that these documents that Judicial Watch obtained prove that Defense and State Department, basically the Obama administration, knew terrorists had planned the attack 10 days in advance. So, and they were just lying through their teeth about all of that. I think the real goal in Benghazi was the hub of the gun-running pipeline from Libya to Syria, where they were taking weapons out of Libya, sending them to Syria to arm ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And it was all supposed to be very hush-hush. Well, now it's pretty much an open secret. That's what was going on. The consulate in Benghazi was where the operation was being run out of, and I think the real purpose of the attack was to simply burn the place to the ground and get rid of all the evidence in one bonfire. And it is just a shame that 4 people had to get killed in this situation. A while back, we were talking about this billionaire, Reid Hoffman, who funded a group that set up a whole bunch of phony Russian social media accounts to try and sell the voters that the Russian government was supporting Alabama Republican Roy Moore in last year's Senate election against now Senator Doug Jones. And Hoffman is the co-founder of LinkedIn. He's one of Silicon Valley's top donors to the Democratic campaigns and PACs. He has now issued an apology over what the people he funded did to Roy Moore, because it's definitely dirty politics. There's no question it's dirty politics. Okay. Alrighty, and let's see what happens when I do that. Okay, yeah, all right. So he's apologized now. We're still dealing with technical issues here. All right. Senator Rand Paul has come out with his annual list of maddening government waste, which this year came in at $114 million. And some of the items that were on there was a $2.4 million daydreaming study, a scientific examination of the sex habits of quails on cocaine, and it is, what do you get from that for all the money? Well, in some cases, they're political payoffs to various scientists or laboratories that have supported a candidate, and you'll say, come up with something, we'll fund it, and that's your payoff here. All right, we're going to take a phone call now from Ulani in Maryland. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, I had a question. What do you think in a collapse with the government, what agency would you think they would consolidate, and what agency you think they would just get rid of, to try to manage their finances? And that's my question. You have a good day. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot. As we've already noted, during the partial government shutdown, what gets shut down are the things the American people want, like museums, national parks, monuments, and we're already getting stories about, veterans who were going to pay their respects at a war memorial, and it's now behind barricades, and they were told to just turn around and go home. So the parts that remain open are, of course, those parts of the government involved in keeping an eye on us and regulating us and making sure that we're all moving in the right direction, like good little slaves here. All right, so let's talk about the economic news now. As I mentioned at the top of the show, it was a wild ride on the stock markets today. It opened about 200 down on the Dow, went down to just about 600, and then very obviously somebody came in to intervene at the end, and they just jammed it right back up to 200 in the green. So that's got to be making people very, very nervous. I know a lot of people were hoping that yesterday's 1,000-point gain was the beginning of a new trend, and we can ride it to the top, and we're all going to be rich. Well, it turns out that apparently what triggered yesterday's record-setting rise is that a lot of investors, a lot of governments and corporations were buying stock to basically put into their pension portfolios to make them look good for the end of the year audits. Now that's a one-time thing, and it was an estimated $64 billion in purchases. But that's not going to happen again. And despite the PPT's best efforts, I think investors are spooked and they are rattled. We got to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And Claire says that her internet also went out. And so, yeah, there was a problem out here with somebody at Spectrum yanking out a cable, plugging it back in. And I know they got to do maintenance and replacement of parts and everything. And there is, unfortunately, no way to arrange that they not disturb our net connection during showtime. So it's just one of those things that happens. And apparently they're also having internet issues over at CenturyLink. They're apparently having a nationwide outage correlating to the blip. Now, it may just be the poor quality computers, software, and equipment and service that we've all come to know and love. But don't forget, there was all this talk about that a cyber attack on our country would be treated as an act of war. And we're coming up here on the New Year's weekend, and everybody's looking to go to war. They're just desperate to find some way to blame it on the other guy. You know, oh my goodness, they cut off our music videos. That's war. We're going to go to war for that one here. Alrighty, turning back to the economic news here. Forbes is now saying, and we all know this already, a worldwide debt default is coming. and it has to. Now, the U.S. government on-budget deficit was $100.5 billion in October. It was $63 billion in the same month a year earlier. So you can see how it's just going up and going up and going up. Now, Congress doesn't want to lower spending. There are a lot of people in our society who are dependent on entitlements. Yes, there are also a lot of people who take advantage of it and exploit it here. But the real problem goes back to that model of private central banking, which by default, by design, produces more debt than money with which to pay the debt. At some point, it does have to come apart. Now, in the past, when a country enslaved to a private central bank basically ran out the debt and crashed the economy, the other bankers around the world would step on in and help them restart the system and re-enslave the country to the private central bankers again. But this time, because of globalism, they're all linked together. And as Forbes seems to be thinking, the entire shebang could come down all at once. At which point, I hope the people of the world will stand up and say, no more of this private central banking nonsense. No more of allowing private bankers to just create money out of thin air and loan it into circulation at interest. It doesn't work in the long run. It's always great for the bankers who set it up. And I'm sure they set it up knowing somewhere down the road there'd be a big, huge crash. But that was going to be long after they were dead and they went to their graves happy after long lives of wealth and comfort and prestige and power. Right now, among the so-called FANG stocks, Facebook is the one that concerns people most. And a lot of it has to do with trust, which is centralizing around Chief Operating Officer Sheryl Sandberg. Okay, we got to take a break for station identification, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and we're talking about the economy here right now. And I'm looking at my mailbox, and I'm getting all kinds of mail from people saying what happened from the radio show, what happened with YouTube, and as we explained before, it looks like there are some problems with the internet as a whole, but out here in Hawaii, it looks like somebody just unplugged a cable over at the server center, and then I guess they had to move it around or something and plugged it right back on in. And they figured it wasn't a big deal because most people would be at work during the day and it's not going to matter if their net goes away for a few seconds. Obviously, for live TV and live radio, that is a little bit different. So we're talking about the FANG stocks. We're talking about how Facebook is considered the problem child right now, where a lot of investors no longer trust Facebook to get itself out of some of the messes it's gotten itself into. And a lot of that is focused on Sheryl Sandberg, who's the Chief Operating Officer. And there is talk about the possibility of Sandberg departing from Facebook. She might be Mark Zuckerberg's sacrificial lamb, although there are calls for both of them to step down here. Russia is still buying gold on the international market, and apparently they bought another 37 tons during November. And the Bank of Russia now holds 2,103 tons of monetary gold. That's a lot of gold. Okay. Putin is now promising Russian government support for Russian businesses to defy the sanctions pressure. And Russian businesses who are facing external restrictions can rely on government support while competitors try to hide behind the political screen. This was a statement made by Putin to the country's business leaders yesterday. Now, referring to the sanctions, Putin stressed the Kremlin sees foreign players trying to hide behind the political screen that they use in unfair competition, elimination of rivals, and division of markets. And there's probably a lot of that going on because Russia is making products people want to buy. Certainly their weapon systems and their agriculture. Russia is GMO free. and as global awareness continues to grow about the dangers of GMO crops and produce, and especially of glyphosate, I can imagine there's a lot of people around the world who want to go to Russia to buy products like durum wheat. We talked about that yesterday. And I'm sure that food producers in the West are saying, find some way to shut it off. We can't compete with GMO food. You know, we have to find some way to force our GMO food and glyphosate onto the world market. So we'll just sanction them. We'll sanction Russia and just cut them off. Now, Iran is planning to sell 3 million barrels of crude oil to private companies in the third round of sales aimed at bypassing the U.S. sanctions. And the license required has been procured from the three branches of power for 3 million barrels of oil to be sold on Iran's energy bourse. 100% in rials, no dollars allowed. He is saying other foreign currencies are also possible. If you don't want to pay in the rial, other currencies can be used, but the dollar is definitely not welcome here. Over in Kenya, in Mombasa, they have a port, and apparently China may soon be acquiring control of that. Apparently, there's a huge unpaid loan that China issued through the Exim Bank of China to the Kenya Railways Corporation. And it looks like the Kenya Railways Corporation is probably going to default. And apparently the government of Kenya waived sovereign immunity on the Kenya Port's assets on signing the agreement with China, thus exposing Kenya Port's authority to foreclosure. So China may have yet another facility in Africa. And that, of course, is something that the United States definitely doesn't want. Remember, we reported yesterday where Bolton is over there in Africa saying, you pick one or the other. It's the United States or China. You can't have both. But I can see why the Africans would be looking at China. China builds things. China's investing in Africa. All the U.S. is doing is dropping bombs here. Now, getting on back to Africa, they're about to become the world's largest free trade zone. And apparently South Africa and Togo's parliaments have ratified the agreement establishing the African Continental Free Trade Area. The total number of countries on this deal has grown to 49. And once the agreement comes into effect, it will create a tariff-free continent covering a single market of 1.2 billion people in 55 nations with a combined gross domestic product of about $3 trillion. Now, I hope Africa is being careful because the EU was sold to the nations of Europe by saying it was going to be a free trade, free travel area. And look at what the EU has morphed into. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And again, the phone lines are open. Down in Venezuela, once they were considered the wealthiest country in Latin America. And they have just fallen on very, very hard times. And part of it is the fact that the United States has waged economic war against them, going back to Hugo Chavez, and unfortunately the socialist policies that are in place. The same kind of policies being advocated here by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. But apparently things have gotten so bad that underage girls are now selling their bodies in exchange for a few bucks a service. Apparently heterosexual men are prostituting themselves on the gay sex market. Those are really, really hard times, but there may be something that may help a little bit. Russians have been offered an opportunity to mine Venezuela's gold and other resources after inflation hits 830,000%. It'll be probably 1 million by New Year's here. And so apparently Venezuela is turning to Russia and offering them mining rights, which again is going to upset the United States because the United States wanted those mining and drilling rights. The harder the U.S. government pushes on all these other countries, the more they drive them out of our sphere of influence and into the sphere of influence of Russia and China. Okay, we're going to take another phone call. Paul in Montana, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mr. Rivero, a moment or two ago you mentioned that Russia is selling wheat and other grains all over the world. And in the last couple of weeks, I heard someplace, I just heard it once or twice, that China is buying X billion dollars worth of soybeans from the United States. And
well, not anymore. They're not.
Is,
not anymore. They're not because of the tariffs. They've gone down to Brazil.
Well, okay, to continue, but the soybeans that China was going to buy from the United States, were they the Monsanto glyphosate soybeans, or were they organic, non-GMO, Roundup glyphosate? That's what I would like to know.
Well, I'm sure China is ordering GMO-free soybeans, glyphosate-free beans, but China will prudently test the cargo when it arrives, because China has been burned in the past by buying U.S. agriculture that was promised as being GMO-free, only to find out it's GMO, and China will not allow that. And they've literally refused cargo ships full of these grains. I think the last one was corn, and just turned them around and said take it right back.
Will they continue to do that? And what is the United States doing with all of its glyphosate, Monsanto, GM grains? Who's buying that crap?
The American people. That's why they outlawed GMO labeling in this country. If they can't sell them overseas, they're going to sell them to the American people, and you are not allowed to know you are eating that stuff. Okay? Paul, are you there? We lost Paul. Boy, it's a bad day for the tech. What can I tell you? Alrighty, getting on back here. Now, because of the partial government shutdown, apparently if the government is still shut down at the end of January, and Trump is saying it very well may be, unless he gets his border wall, the food stamp money will run out. And that's when people are going to get very, very upset. Now, getting on back to Mark Zuckerberg and all of his problems, he may be the biggest loser of the year economically. He's already down nearly $20 billion based on the stock that he owns in Facebook. So right now he ranks 7th on Bloomberg's Billionaires Index, but it's definitely heading down. Poor old Mark. I'm sure he'll do okay here. Now, over at MSNBC, and by the way, their ratings have now topped Fox News for the first time in like years. But they must be doing something right here. They were interviewing former Senator Barbara Boxer on the show All In. And Boxer said that incoming Speaker Nancy Pelosi will reopen the government despite the objections of President Donald Trump over a lack of funding for a wall on the Mexico border. And Boxer said, Wall Street, the thing they hate the most is this kind of chaos, this up and down and up. And, you know, hey, 1,000 points up, that's great. Is it going to go down 1,000 points tomorrow? This is not good for the country. Well, here is the reality. That spending bill, after it is voted on by the House and the Senate, has to go to Donald Trump's desk, where he has to sign it, or it's basically dead. He can veto it, and just send it back and say, I want the wall money in there. And the corporate media is going to try and blame Donald Trump for all of this, but it isn't. It is these Democrats who want the borders open so they can bring more illegal immigrants into this country to help steal elections. apparently Nancy Pelosi is responding to Trump's attempts to compromise on the exact nature of the wall. And originally it was going to be this huge solid concrete. Now it's down to these steel posts, looks like a giant picket fence. And Pelosi is not impressed. And she basically said that he's gone from cement to a beaded curtain. Well, Trump, stop compromising, okay? Because every time you do, it is used against you. And second, the Democrats are not interested in a compromise position. The Democrats want the borders open. What part of that are you not hearing? All right. Now, Ocasio-Cortez, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, has gotten into a little trouble because she got out there wishing a Merry Christmas to refugee babies in mangers, trying to draw a parallel between the plight of refugees to the nativity story. And it sort of backfired on here. And this is not the first time where Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has tried to link refugees to score political points. Last November, she referred to the hundreds of migrants attempting to illegally cross the U.S.-Mexico border, claiming the migrants were the same as Jews who tried to escape the persecution in Nazi Germany. And she kind of got laughed at that one as well. Now, as you know, there's been a problem with some of the children not being in good health down there at the border. And there was this Guatemalan child who died. And the corporate media was out there just doing what they do, trying to push the agenda and try and say it was all the fault of the Department of Homeland Security. And one CBS News reporter was interviewing a DHS official. How could you let the sick immigrant child out of the hospital? And the DHS official said it was the hospital's decision. The medical staff at the hospital said she was okay to do. Now, all of a sudden, there does seem to be a growing problem. Something has broken up, some kind of an illness, and apparently dozens of sick migrants are being transported to hospitals across the border every day. And growing numbers of children showing illness are presently in Border Patrol custody. And the Department of Homeland Security has called in the CDC to figure out what's going on. Now, there are two possibilities here. One is that one of these migrants was carrying a very dangerous, highly communicable disease. And the question following that one is, what happens if they get through the fence and go to a major American city? The other possibility is that somebody has dropped a test tube on the migrants to make them sick so they can play for sympathy yet again. There was a story that came on out from 12160. They even have a video where reporters, corporate media reporters, are caught on camera bringing illegals across the border to stage the sad-looking photos. They're not reporting the news, they're manufacturing it. That's not what journalism is supposed to be about. And apparently, over in Stanislaus County, there was a Newman police officer was shot and killed during a traffic stop yesterday morning. The person who shot the police officer and killed him was an illegal immigrant here in the country illegally. Now, the officer himself is a legal immigrant who came to this country through the legal immigration process. Apparently, all his life is he wanted to be a cop. His name was Ronil Singh. They've not released the name of the suspect, but they do know who it is, and there's a manhunt on the way for him. Over in Great Britain, Brexit is very much under threat And part of the problem is being manifested in this fear-mongering campaign coming out from Theresa May's government, aided by the British press, to try and convince Britons, if we leave Europe, Godzilla's going to come stomp on our city. And it is a fear-mongering campaign, because one of the best ways to control people without resorting to violence is to keep them in a permanent state of fear. It reminds me of the movie V for Vendetta and that speech by the Chancellor toward the very end, where he says, "I want them to remember why they need us." That's how control is met. But the British people are standing firm. They voted to leave the confines of the EU and all of its institutions. The people have voted. The will of the people is known. Unfortunately, the Westminster parliamentarians are acting in their own interest. And if Brexit is blocked or somehow destroyed, I would not be surprised if there was mass rioting in the streets of Great Britain. Now, Tim Martin is out there saying that former Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson is the only candidate who can deliver Brexit for the country. And he's basically saying that, Boris Johnson needs to be prepped to step on in when Prime Minister Theresa May, who he describes as a loser, finally leaves office. Over in Sweden, they're preparing for a very tumultuous year. Apparently, the mainstream political parties are now shunning all populists. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, over in Hungary, Prime Minister Viktor Orban is still stirring the pot. And apparently, in an interview published in the Daily Magyar Irak earlier this week, came on out and said, "We do not want a mixed population, and therefore we are protecting our borders and oppose migration." Now, of course, all of the open borders people are going to start screaming, "Racist, he's a racist, of course you want a mixed population." Why don't you tell that to all those people who have been robbed and raped, or worse, beheaded? This idea of merging all the people of the world into one population, it is not working out. Over in Germany, their federal Supreme Court has made a new ruling on a child marriage case, which is probably going to have serious implications on the way child marriages conducted legally overseas are treated in Germany. And apparently it derives from a case of a Syrian man who was separated from his underage wife when the pair arrived in Germany as asylum seekers back in 2015. Now, the pair were married back in February of 2015 while the man was age 21 and the girl aged only 14, and under a procedure that was done under Sharia law in Syria, but is considered invalid by German authorities where the marriage age was 16 at the time. So now apparently the German courts are saying, well, yes, if you marry a child bride in another country, that's cool. That's going to be really cool. Now, there's a new set of voices coming on the stage regarding this whole migration situation. And it's coming from Syria, and it's coming from the women. And if you've been looking at the photos of all the refugees that are pouring into Europe, they're overwhelmingly male. And so basically the women are saying it's time for Europe and the other countries who have absorbed these Syrian young men to kick them out and send them home to help rebuild the country now that the war is coming to an end. And a journalist at Swedish public broadcaster SVT, Johan Matthias Sommerstrom, traveled to Damascus, Syria, and interviewed some of the students at the University of Damascus, 70% of whom are women. And two of the students said, look around, you just see women. The university, on the streets and cafes, just women. So the Syrian men have basically abandoned their country. They've abandoned their women folk. They want to live in Europe. They don't want to go, apparently don't want to go back and rebuild their country. And I can understand it's going to be a lot of work. 7 years of war has really wrecked the place. But if you are at all loyal to your home country, that's the proper thing to do. Okay, once again, the PC crowd, the leftists are out there. Queen Elizabeth II had her annual Christmas Day TV message, and in the background is a gold piano. And apparently this leftist newspaper just went ballistic, saying, oh, talk about the excess of the wealthy, and my goodness, a gold piano here, and just think how many poor people we could feed with that. Well, I got a news flash for you. It's not gold. It's gold leaf over wood. There's maybe 1/4 of an ounce of gold that was used in that. Over in the EU Parliament, apparently with nothing better to do, they're urging the members of the European Parliament to adopt gender-neutral language. And apparently, under the new guidelines, European lawmakers will be strongly encouraged to say chair instead of chairman, artificial instead of man-made, and humanity instead of mankind. Like I said, it's not like they don't have anything else pressing on their minds right now. Okay, Klaus Relotius, former reporter for Der Spiegel, and he was busted for inventing facts and interviews in his stories for years. He's left Der Spiegel, and his hot water just went to boil. He's now been accused of embezzling money allegedly meant for Syrian orphans in Turkey. Relotius allegedly took donations from readers following the publication of his article Königskinder, which was published in July 2016, to a personal bank account. And apparently that article also contained fabrications and lies. Apparently Relotius had written about a Syrian refugee boy in Turkey named Ahmed who had to bury his mother and had a sister who was forced into brutal work at a textile factory, and apparently none of it was true. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go to the phones to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, how you doing? You had a caller talking about, like, soybeans, where are they all going? Well, not only are the American people eating it, but they're kind of, like, stockpiled in grain silos. They're not going anywhere.
Well, I mean, I'm sure a lot of farmers are hoping that some of these tariffs are going to relax and they can sell them to somebody who's still willing to buy GMO grains, which I imagine probably a lot of the third world, if they sell them at a low enough price, they'll gladly take them in.
Well, did that farm bill ever go through?
Yeah, the farm bill went on through, $880 billion. But right now that's on hold. And again, if the government is still partially shut down by the end of January, the food stamp money will run out. I don't know if the farm subsidy checks are going to stop as well. But yeah, apparently it's a bit of a mess over there.
Because, China buys a lot of soybeans. There's going to be a lot of farm bills then.
Well, China has switched to Brazil as their main supplier because of the tariff issue, because of Trump's tariff war.
Yeah, I know, but what I'm saying is they're going to have to keep doing farm bills for the farmers because they'll never be able to match those soybeans that China's getting from Brazil. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, who else is going to buy them? And Mike, remember, there was also, weren't we stockpiling cheese also because of the Canada thing? Whatever happened to that?
Oh, that was back during, if we're both thinking about the same incident, that was back during when Reagan was in office. And the cheese piled up so much, they just started giving it away. was called the Reagan cheese. Everybody got mailed a block of cheese, and I remember we got one. It was darn good cheese, too.
And Mike, on Kenya, you mentioned that with the port. Now, that's a great opportunity because China now can, I know they are working on Kenya's infrastructure also.
Yes.
They can expand that infrastructure. Because remember, South Africa is part of the BRICS, right? And that's part of the Belt and the Road also?
Run that one by me again.
I mean, South Africa was part of BRICS. If they're going to do that, hopefully not the EU thing, but have like a free trade zone. That,
well,
China will benefit, from that, right?
Yeah, I imagine that they would. And but I don't know that South Africa is part of the BRICS nations. But the story was that Africa is now turning itself into a free trade zone, where products leaving one country and going into another, there are no tariffs, and so everybody's just going to be trading again, free trade, and it creates a climate in which the best product at the best price is going to sell. And the whole point of all these tariffs and subsidies and the rest of it is that the United States doesn't have the best products at the best price anymore.
And my last comment on that, what's her name? Cortez from New York?
Yes.
Otasia Cortez. But mentioned about baby Jesus being at the border. Isn't that amazing to say something like that, considering all these people are for abortion, right? I mean,
yeah, it really is rather amazing to see how they're just so concerned about all these little tiny children, and yet they applaud Planned Parenthood for just dropping them unborn babies into the blenders here. And but again, when you get to liberalism, it does not have an internal philosophy that is self-consistent. It's always ad hoc. What they want at the moment is what they want.
And I wonder if anybody from Washington sent any aid to the children of Syria for the Christmas and the New Year's.
Not a bit.
I doubt it.
Not a bit.
Thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Phone lines are now open again. This is a funny little story. Over in the small German town of Zettel, the police got a phone call from what turned out to be a 9-year-old German boy who apparently got up Christmas morning and saw that the presents left for him by Santa were not even close to anything he'd wanted. And so he basically called the police to bring in Santa and find out what the heck is going on. So anyway, speaking of Christmas and the police getting greedy, this has become acceptable behavior to simply confiscate people's property just because you want it. And apparently police departments are actually keeping lists of items that they're looking for. They call them little goodies. Things that belong to you. And this hideous practice extends to your car and your home, and there is incentive for them to take what's yours. And I'm sure the American people are wondering why we're all being forced to play Santa Claus to the cops whose salaries and budgets we're already paying. Okay. Now, the incoming Democrats are already getting ready to go after the guns. And they've already drafted a bill that will criminalize private gun sales. As a free American, you will no longer be able to sell your own property without the government's permission, unless you want to be labeled as a criminal. Now, this bill will not prevent mass shootings. There was actually a government study conducted that actually showed that the vast majority of gun owners regulate themselves. And apparently these Democrats demanded this study into the sale of guns online. They spent 2 years attempting to buy guns illegally on the dark web. They did not succeed a single time. Now, a lot of states already have laws saying that you cannot privately sell your guns. I remember many years ago in California, you could sell your own gun, and it was up to the purchaser to go and register it if necessary. I remember when we lived in Washington State, and this was admittedly a long time ago as well, same thing. I remember actually seeing handguns for sale at a garage sale. But it's very, very different. Here in Hawaii, you have to actually take your gun to a gun dealer and have him run all of the background checks on the potential buyer. And when that comes back, the gun dealer then delivers the gun to your buyer, at which point hopefully you get your money. But it's just another way of tracking guns and gun owners. And it's not going to stop the mass shootings, because half of them are caused by these psychological drugs, and the other half are being set up and staged to push the gun grab agenda. Now, the reality is that statistics are showing firearms-related crime and death are actually in decline. In fact, accidental firearms death plunged 41% since 1999. But corporate media won't report the facts. Their job is to push the fear, to make you afraid of guns, to control you through that fear. Every time there's a mass shooting, it gets network coverage, hours and hours, coast to coast, live and in color. Every time there's a citizen with a legally owned gun that stops a mass shooting, it gets zero coverage. They don't want you thinking about the possibility that you can protect yourself. They want you to always call the police, who will show up about maybe somewhere between 15, 20 minutes after you make the phone call. And they'll come on in, they'll take a report, clean up the dead bodies, and then, ransack your house for anything on the goodies list. Now, there's an article that came on out saying that even a lot of Republicans in the new Congress are starting to think about gun confiscation. And the way it's being brought about is through what are called the red flag laws, or extreme risk protection orders. And these laws basically allow the police to confiscate an individual's firearms who has been declared a threat to themselves or others by a wide variety of people. Their doctor, their family, the clergy, the garbage man, family member, friend, associate, and you get your guns. And there's no due process. You don't even get a hearing before a judge. And it can take months before a gun owner could appear in court to try and get his guns back. 13 states currently have these so-called red flag laws on the books. And now they're talking about a federal red flag law. And bit by bit, they're trying to get rid of that Second Amendment, because they know they're in a corner. Economically and politically, they can't turn around and turn this nation back into something that we, the American people, would be comfortable in or be grateful to the government for. So, bit by bit here. Apparently, several GOP members in the upcoming Congress stick out like a sore thumb when it comes to their gun control advocacy. They include Brian Mast from Florida's 18th district. Apparently, he penned an op-ed for the New York Times a few months ago calling for the ban of so-called assault weapons and several firearms accessories. And apparently Mast went on to co-sponsor House Resolution 2598, which authorizes the Department of Justice's community-oriented policing services to provide grants to states with red flag laws on the books. So they're already bribing these states to pass these laws. Now, Marco Rubio, following the Parkland shooting, sponsored a red flag bill along with Democratic Senators Joe Manchin, Bill Nelson, and Jack Reed. And Rubio has even flirted with the idea of regulations on the magazine clips. He wants to raise the minimum age to buy certain firearms like AR-15s and tweak the current background check system. Now, that last one I don't have a problem with, simply because it has utterly, utterly failed so many times to spot these people. Rick Scott, former governor of Florida and now the U.S. Senator, and despite his ostensible anti-gun control rhetoric, Scott signed Senate Bill 7026, Florida's most expansive gun control measure in recent history, which included red flag provisions, raises the age to buy a firearm to 21, and imposes a 3-day waiting period for all firearms purchases. Boy, what a far cry from the world I knew when I was a kid, where you were given your first gun on your 12th birthday. Boy or girl, didn't matter. And you were taught how to use it safely. They even had gun safety classes in the public schools. The schools had gun clubs. The government was actually handing out rifles left over from World War II as surplus to support these gun clubs. And boy, have we gone the other way. Then we have Larry Hogan, who's Maryland's governor, and he signed a series of gun bills which included a red flag law, which resulted in the shooting death of 61-year-old Gary Willis when police showed up with a court order ordering that he turn over his guns. And it led to an altercation, and he was killed. Now, the part I do have a problem with is, first of all, anybody can say, I'm concerned. And they don't need to be qualified. There's no training required. It could just be, you know, the postal worker thinks you look funny that day. Okay. Now, over in Ohio, their General Assembly has voted to override Governor John Kasich's veto on House Bill 228. This is a bill that would have revamped the way the state handles self-defense cases. And the law shifts the burden of proof in self-defense cases from the defense to the prosecution. It's got a lot of support from pro-gun groups. So basically, this bill says that the prosecution has to prove that somebody in his home or out there defending himself, prosecution has to prove they were the ones who acted maliciously and acted first. This bill, John Kasich wanted it gone. He wanted to keep the advantage where the burden of proof is on the defense, to prove that they did act in self-defense. And apparently he's also pushing the red flag law here. All right, here's a bizarre story. The Anheuser-Busch Company, which is the maker of Budweiser, they're now partnering with a medical cannabis company, Tilray, in a $100 million deal to research cannabis-infused drinks for the Canadian market. And Anheuser-Busch and Tilray each said they would invest $50 million in the project to study non-alcoholic drinks containing a cannabidiol, or CBD, which some claim has calming and healing effects, and tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC. That's the psychoactive compound. So they're basically going to sell you marijuana beer. Must be good to live in Canada. All right, turning to the natural news. Saturday night, they had a tsunami hit the Sunda Strait. Over 280 people are dead, hundreds more injured. And there was no warning because the Indonesian tsunami warning system listens for earthquakes. And what apparently happened is Anak Krakatau is in eruption, and apparently a large portion of the side of the volcano cone just slid into the ocean and created this tsunami. And apparently they do not have a warning buoy system, or it would have picked that up, or they had one and it's been allowed to basically rot away. All right, we got to take a break here for another commercial break, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And one of our alert listeners has corrected me, as a matter of fact, that South Africa is included in the BRICS nations. In fact, it is the S in BRICS. So we're talking about this tsunami that hit Indonesia. No warning, was caused by part of the volcano Anak Krakatau literally sliding into the ocean. And it is a real risk, especially with stratovolcanoes, which have very steep sides. And there are some volcanoes around the world that are at risk, including Hawaii's own Kilauea, which has this southern rift zone where a large chunk of land has actually cracked off and slid down by several inches. Another one is Cumbra Vieja in the Canary Islands, that they're concerned about that, and that is a steep-sided volcano as well. The big concern right now is that Anak Krakatau has sprung to life, and the meaning of that is son of Krakatoa, and I'm sure we've all heard about Krakatoa and this massive eruption on August 27th, 1883. And when it exploded, it was so loud, it was literally heard 3,000 miles away. Barometric instruments in universities in Great Britain felt the barometric wave pass by 5 times. It circled the world over and over and over. And some of the tsunami waves generated were over 100 feet tall in some places. So the concern is Krakatoa is coming back to life. Will it be a peaceful, ongoing eruption like we have at Kilauea, or is it building up to another real big deal? Because it could hurt a lot of people, could also lower global temperatures for many, many years. All right, let's take a phone call. Paul in Montana, aloha. I understand you have a comment about one of our earlier stories.
Yes, sir. You just mentioned that Budweiser was going to take THC-infused beverages to the market.
Yes, up in Canada.
How many times have we seen what big business has done to things like medicine, food, tobacco, and booze? And as far as booze is concerned, all of this glyphosate-drenched grains are now being used in booze. I mean, I'll listen to your comments on the air.
Well, some are, some aren't. In fact, Smirnoff Vodka launched a major ad campaign that they're only using GMO-free grains. So they wouldn't spray them with glyphosate because the glyphosate would kill off the grain plant. Okay? There's no question. Corporations have been allowed to run rampant with poor quality products, dangerous products, with little regard for life and health of the customers. All right, so we're going to let you go. We're talking about volcanoes, and apparently over in Sicily, Mount Etna is flaring up. And it's the first flank eruption in more than 10 years, and they had to raise the aviation color code to red, which means airplanes need to stay away. Because if you fly through a volcanic plume, it's going to sandblast the front of your airplane. The glass gets into the engine and melts and causes all kinds of problems. We're going to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we're going to take a phone call from Mark in North Carolina. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, we were talking before about, police abuse, like confiscating people's property, and of course, the possibility of gun confiscation. That would be, you want a civil war. That's probably the quickest way a civil war is going to be triggered up. If they come after the guns. Now, I just want to say something about the police. Okay, obviously you know about Waco, and I remember we talked about it before, and you said you thought you heard something about that before. ATF officers that were killed had worked for the Secret Service, and they were covering something up or something like that. But I've looked into Waco. I've looked at the documentaries about it, read about it, looked at the movie and the documentaries, and from what I remember what happened. Plain and simple, the ATF was prepared. They had over 100 agents, heavily armed. I mean, they were going to take that place and they were going to bring some smoke. They did not expect that they were going to be met with that kind of resistance. As soon as that resistance started, and a few of their officers started getting blown away, they ran like a bunch of chickens. I mean, like a bunch of, like a hound with his tail between their legs. They were actually crying. I saw, an interview with the sheriff at the time, not just on the documentary called something about.
ATF was in serious political trouble. They had, of course, not been created with police powers, but they'd been given them recently, and so they started going on out and acting like a police force, and there had been several unfortunate incidents of the BATF kicking down the wrong doors and shooting and killing innocent homeowners. And so there was a lot of talk in Washington, D.C. about rescinding the BATF's police powers and requiring the BATF to basically work with local police enforcement whenever they had to engage in a mission. Well, the BATF did not want to give up their power. So they figured they needed some good press. And so they decided, we're going to go on over to this church compound. And we know they've got a lot of guns there because the way they fund their little communal lifestyle is they buy and sell guns. They'll buy broken guns, repair them. They take them out to gun shows and sell them, which, being Texas, it was all perfectly legal and above board. David Koresh was known to all the local law enforcement. He was friends with everybody. Only the week before Waco had happened, they'd all gone shooting together. And Koresh brought some guns, the cops brought the ammo, and they had a really good Texas time. But the BATF said, we're going to take these people down. We're going to have a real big news story about this dangerous gun-loving cult that was brought to heel by the BATF. And they actually brought along a bunch of reporters with them to make sure they had good media coverage, one of whom was friends with David Koresh. And so this reporter called Koresh and said, are you aware that you're about to be raided by the BATF? And Koresh said, no, thank you for letting me know. So when the BATF showed up, Koresh opens the front door of the Branch Davidian Church and he walks out unarmed, at which point he is shot in the groin by one of the BATF people. And they get back inside and things just went downhill from there. And I wrote an article about Waco myself, looking at all the photographic evidence and realizing that virtually all of the gunfire was going from the outside in. And it later turned out that the reason there was almost no return fire at all was because all of the working guns were out at gun shows being sold that day. And if you look at the post-fire photo of their armory, their storage area, the guns are all undisturbed. And the ashes falling on them prove that they were there in their racks and stands when the fire started. So it was a horrible, horrible situation. It was a huge embarrassment for the government, which was ended when the FBI came on in with their tanks saying, this is not an assault, this is not an assault, and knocked holes in the walls of the church and pumped in this CS tear gas, which is illegal to use on enemy troops in time of war. And as a propellant, they used methyl acrylate, which is the chemical that is used to bend plexiglass to make those nice little shields over the salad bar in restaurants so that you're not dropping your dandruff and ukus all over the food underneath here. And that stuff is lethally dangerous. And they basically just made sure that there were no witnesses who could tell the other side of the story. Then, of course, Hollywood cranked out this movie about David Koresh was sexually abusing all the children in the church, and the usual propaganda that comes out following these things.
Well, but the whole thing is, Mike, what I'm trying to say, and if you notice, I don't believe the FBI was actually driving those tanks either. I believe it was probably Wesley Clark doing a favor because he was personal friends with Slick Willie. And remember, he was the commander, I believe, of the 1st Cav, which was by Fort Hood at the time, which is very close. I believe he did a favor to Slick Willie at the time and secretly used some of his armored personnel. Because, as far as I know, the FBI doesn't know how to drive and work tanks, okay? So I don't believe that part either. I believe what I am trying to say, though, is the police are not going to be able to control a rebellious population. They would be slaughtered, okay? They just don't have the kind of guys. They're not used to combat. They're used to basically, a 10-on-1 situation most of the time. They have to wrestle somebody to the floor or something like that, or to shoot, every once in a while one of them gets shot. It doesn't really happen that often. It's just that the corporate media plays it up so much. It's not even considered one of the more dangerous jobs in the country. So I don't believe they're prepared. They're ready, or they would know what to do. I think they would. And by the way, I believe some police, especially sheriff's departments, who are directly elected by the people, especially in Middle America and real America, would not go along with something like that anyway. There are already reports of sheriffs saying we're not going to, confiscate guns and all that, even now. And
well, it's interesting because the open borders people have already helped set the legal precedent for states and local communities to simply say, we're going to ignore federal law, with all these sanctuary cities.
Right.
And I remember when the Rodney King riots broke out in Los Angeles, how the LAPD ran like heck when they saw that crowd of people.
Oh, they sure did. They ran like chickens. They were not ready. That's why they actually had to call in finally. Even the National Guard wasn't enough at the time. They actually had to call in the regular Army and the Marines to actually quell that riot. And that was, back in the 1990s. We're not even talking about the 60s when this happened quite a bit. Police are not, the brave, No, I used to be a peace officer in New York, okay? Believe me, you're not the bravest people in the world. I'm not the bravest guy in the world, okay?
Yeah.
You think I could, if somebody asked me whether I could do what they did in World War II and storm up those cliffs there at Normandy, I'm going to tell you right now, I don't think so, okay? I'd have probably had a nervous breakdown, all right?
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you right now. Even had I gone to Vietnam, I don't know, I wasn't military somewhere not too far from Vietnam, not too far, away from the Vietnam times. And I'm telling you, too, I don't know if I could have gone to Vietnam and been successful, okay? Because, that is real danger. To be a policeman or any other kind of law enforcement officer, be an FBI, it's chicken stuff, you know what, okay?
Yeah.
It's not the same thing. They would not be able to control the American population. As soon as they ran into organized resistance, and you would have militias forming. You'd have heavily armed militias forming, and they would stop the confiscations. And you saw what happened too in Nevada there with the Bundys.
Yes.
The federal officers chickened out. They chickened out, plain and simple. Okay, they weren't ready to take those guys on. They knew these guys meant business. Later on, they set traps for them and arrested a bunch of them illegally, but they were not ready to take on those. Not only the ranchers, but the militias that came to help the ranchers. They're not ready for that. I'm telling you, Mike, they better not start with the confiscation. You better start having some common sense here. Now, I know they'll get away with it probably in a city like New York, Chicago, Los Angeles even today. Not the Los Angeles back in the 90s, but the LA of today, San Francisco. Sure, they get away with that there. But they're not going to get away with it in the middle America. They're not even going to get away with it in liberal Washington. Washington is one of the places where the sheriff in not in the Seattle area, but in eastern Washington, said that he's not going to confiscate guns and confiscate magazines. That's not going to happen.
Didn't somebody set up a sanctuary city for gun owners? I seem to remember that from earlier in the year, where they literally declared their town a sanctuary city for gun owners, and that no federal gun laws would be enforced in there.
and these magazine laws are illegal too. You can't tell us how many. Most magazines are like a 9mm is set up for about 17 rounds. Okay, you're not gonna get people to go back to the 10-round magazines. It's not going to happen. It may happen in a few states that basically it's almost impossible to get a gun anyway, which to me goes against the Constitution. I personally believe the Constitution says you have the right, any American citizen has the right to have and carry a gun. Now, if you mess up with it, that's different. Then you get arrested and you go to jail. Okay?
Well,
But
there's actually been a couple of Supreme Court cases that declared the Second Amendment reserves to the American people equal weapons to those possessed by the uniformed military. And that, of course, gets to the heart of the purpose of the Second Amendment, which is to reserve to the American people the means to convince the government to mind its own business. But, of course, the government doesn't want to mind its own business. It wants to mind your business, and that's why the Second Amendment is under attack.
And when they talk about the militia, they're talking about the militia the way it was back then when the people were the militia. Even if you go into the Old West, and that even goes with talking about sheriffs and posses. Like in the Old West, you might have had in a town or area had maybe one or two. You may have had a sheriff or a marshal and a couple of deputies, and that's it. Anything major that they had to take care of, the sheriff would form a posse of citizens.
Yes.
He would deputize them as a posse, and they would take care of what they had to take care of. If it was pretty much everybody was armed, and
Yes.
they were usually able to take care of business. That's how it was handled then. It wasn't handled that they had a bunch of uniformed donut-eating slobs going around, like they issue traffic.
Well, what's amazing? What's amazing bit of history is that despite the image promoted of the Wild West, which was actually propaganda to try and discourage laborers in Eastern factories from going on out and homesteading, the Wild West was actually quite calm and far more peaceful than the big cities of the time, especially if you look at the draft riots of New York. And the reason the gunfight at the OK Corral became such an historic event is it was so unusual. Nothing like that had ever happened before in the history of the West, and everybody was talking about it. And the primary reason that cowboys wore guns on their hips had nothing to do with robbing banks or shooting each other or quick draw. It was a safety device, because if you got thrown from your horse and your foot was stuck in the stirrup and the horse was galloping, you were going to die unless you had the means to bring the horse down. And that's where that whole idea of a gun and holster emerged from.
I thought it basically is the equalizer, that everybody had the ability to defend themselves. I thought that's what it was. I didn't know that was the case about the horse, So, but I'm telling you, Mike, they better stop with this, confiscation, because they are going. That if anything starts a civil war, that's going to be it. If they try to do that.
Well, I hear you, and I hear so many other people saying civil war, revolution, and I'm sad to hear it, because along with avoiding World War III, avoiding a bloody conflict in the streets of the United States has been one of my major reasons for doing what I've been doing for the last quarter of a century. And so, in essence, with all this talk about civil war and revolution around there, I'm feeling like a failure and that I've wasted all those years. So I hope you're wrong. I concede that you may well be right.
You know what, Mike? Let's look at the good side. I don't think either are going to happen. I pray they don't. But if I had to take a choice between a civil war in the United States or a thermonuclear war with Russia and or China, I'll take the civil war, okay? Because we can survive that. We're not going to survive a thermonuclear war with it's not going to happen. So wouldn't you take,
yeah, if I had to choose between thermonuclear war with the rest of the world and a civil war in the United States, I would go with the Civil War. Of course, that's easy for me to say. I'm an old man now. I'm not going to be serving in anybody's army on either side. My guns, which hold only one shot, they're all corroded to uselessness anyway. They're basically wall decorations at this point in my life.
What kind of gun laws does Hawaii have anyway?
Oh, we've got very, very strict gun laws. We have very strict gun laws, and they're always pushing for more.
North Carolina here, you can carry you don't even have to have a concealed carry permit to have a gun in your car as long as it's exposed. and you also have open carry. You can carry a weapon. I see some people going in the stores and stuff with their, guns on their hips that you can, as long as it's open and it's not concealed, you can do that without a license. I don't do that because I don't like attention. I don't like people looking at me and stuff like that. It's ridiculous, you know what I mean? I think, however, if things get bad enough, I might. I do, same thing, have it in the vehicle. Right now, crime isn't that bad of a situation here, and I got my house protected, but, I try not to go out, outside with it, all right, if I don't have to. But like I said, if things get bad enough, it might come down to it. And at least this is a state where, at least for now, hopefully we're not going to get some liberal that's going to try to take that away. I don't think so. Not in the deep south. It's probably not going to happen. But you never know. But I personally believe no laws when it comes to the Second Amendment. Believe it or not, Vermont, which is a very liberal state, is one of the best on gun laws. That's one of the reasons I would have possibly voted for Bernie Sanders, that he got the nomination. Vermont has some of the best laws in the country because there are no laws. The same thing in a lot of other states passed constitutional authority. But they've got to start, stop with that thing about the red flag laws, because all that's going to lead to is abuse. Because anybody could say anything about anybody. I mean, I'm thinking to myself when I was married, me and my ex were going at it, living in the same house. Now, what I did at the time, like I said, I was a law enforcement officer at the time. I knew she would try something, so I left my guns at work, in the operations office at work. I told them what was going on. I said, it's better I don't have them on me. And sure enough, she calls the cops one day and said I threatened her, right? And with a gun. I said, so I showed them a receipt from from my major at the time that was in charge. And here's the receipt. This is where I keep my guns. I don't take them home with me because of all the problems I'm having with her. I suspected she was going to do. He was ready to arrest. They were ready to arrest her for that. I told them, just leave her alone. Forget it.
Okay.
I was going to be like that because I had little kids.
Yeah, basically, these red flag laws are not going to solve the mass shooting problem. They are, in fact, probably going to create a lot of domestic discord, which could then, in turn, lead to violence. And you don't have to have a gun to commit an act of violence. We have seen that demonstrated time again. Go to the hardware store, buy a machete. Anyway, Mark, I've let you rambled on long enough. We have to take a commercial break, and we'll be back with more news after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And apparently there is now a yellow vest movement in Taiwan. So this is really spreading. And I imagine after the holidays are over, and especially after we get into the spring thaw, I think it's really going to take off. Okay, speaking of getting into the warming of spring, there is a blizzard warning across the Midwest. A lot of snow coming down there. Up in Washington State, where we used to live, it's snowing on Snoqualmie Pass, where Claire and I used to go on up there, and we'd see the most beautiful blues and some of that glaciated ice there. And so it is coming down out there. And we're supposed to get thunderstorms here tonight, but we're not going anywhere. So now here's an interesting little example of how the Greens, the liberals, what have you, will latch onto an idea and not think it all the way through. And one that I've talked about many times before is when they went to this idea of using ethanol as an automotive fuel. And they said it's going to be carbon neutral because the plants being processed to make the ethanol absorb the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, which is then re-released when you burn the ethanol. The problem is that, first of all, it's not carbon neutral when you factor in the emissions from the processing plants. Two, ethanol does not have the same chemical energy as gasoline, so you have to buy and burn more of it to get the same amount of work out of your vehicle. Third, especially for older cars, they're not designed to work with ethanol, and it was dissolving the fuel systems. There are a lot of new cars now where when you buy them, you better read that manual very carefully, because it says if you are using gasoline above a certain level of concentration, it will void the warranty on the engine. So they really did not think it all the way through. And this is another example. Everyone's talking solar panels. Oh, solar panels are clean. It's a clean source of energy. It's a clean source of energy. Well, once they're built, yes. The problem is that the manufacture and then eventual disposal of them produces huge amounts of toxic waste. And the International Renewable Energy Agency in 2016 estimated there were about 250,000 metric tons of solar panel waste in the world at the end of the year. And they're projecting that this will reach 78 million metric tons by 2050. Now, solar panels contain lead, cadmium, other toxic chemicals that cannot be removed without breaking apart the entire panel. And approximately 90% of most PV modules are made up of glass. But the glass cannot be recycled as float glass due to the impurities in it, which include plastics, lead, cadmium, and antimony. So researchers at the Electric Power Research Institute undertook a study for U.S. solar-owning companies and determined that to plan for end of life of the solar panels, that disposal in regular landfills could not be recommended because these toxic materials would leach out into the groundwater. Now, a lot of people concerned about vaccine safety have cheered on the election to the U.S. House of Representatives, Senator Mark Green. He's a medical doctor. And he is out there vowing that he is going to challenge the CDC about fraudulent vaccine research and data. Now, according to the Autism Action Network, who has an action alert about the issue, Dr. Green, a West Point graduate and Bronze Star hero, intends to stand on the CDC's desk and get the real data on vaccines. And I'm proud of you and good luck, and make sure you're wearing your Kevlar undies because there's big money in vaccines. Big enough to kill for. Now, over in Italy, they've had a major upset. This month, the Italian government fired all 30 members of their vaccine policy advisory board, saying it needs a rethink. Now, over in Italy, children are required to have 11 vaccines to attend school. The Italian people are fighting back. First, they voted out the government that pushed for the mandates. And apparently, in December, a scientific research group, Corvelva, announced it had received 10,000 euros from the Italian National Order of Biologists to use the money to test the contents of every vaccine currently on the market. The result of their first test was released on December 16th. The report is a doozy. We did mention it before, but I'm going to mention it again because you will never hear this on the corporate media. Basically, they found the vaccines did not have the antigens for the disease the vaccine was for, meaning no antibodies would be created. The vaccines were fraud. They also found all kinds of mysterious cross-contaminants as well. We got to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking about this big scandal that just erupted over there in Italy, where the Italian government has literally fired everybody on their vaccine safety board and said, we need a rethink here. And there was this laboratory, Corvelva, that got a grant to actually test the vaccines to see what was in them. And the first vaccine they thoroughly tested was Infanrix Hexa. This is a 6-in-1 vaccine manufactured by GlaxoSmithKline that is supposed to contain the following antigens: tetanus, diphtheria, pertussis toxoids, inactivated poliomyelitis, viral strains 1, 2, and 3, and hepatitis B surface antigen. And the lab found none of those antigens in the vaccine. It just wasn't there. What they did find was unrecognizable macromolecules, very large molecules like proteins, chemical toxins, various free bacterial peptides that are potential allergens and are capable of inducing autoimmune reactions. And apparently a lot of people are saying this could finally bring justice to parents who lost their children in 2009 when 36 children died and more than 1,700 were injured in a clinical trial, which is big pharma speak for human experimentation. Meanwhile, over at New Jersey, at the Health Plus Surgery Center, almost 4,000 people have to have their blood tested after it was revealed they may have been exposed to HIV, hepatitis B, and hepatitis C. And apparently, these were patients of the Health Plus Surgery Center in Saddlebrook. And if you were treated there between January 2018 and September 7th, 2018, you've probably received a letter or will receive a letter saying that during this period, there were, quote, lapses in infection control, in sterilization, and cleaning instruments. In other words, they just weren't taking care of stuff. Now, remember a while ago, we reported on this Johns Hopkins study that said medical mistakes are now the third leading cause of death in this country. Now, when the corporate media puts up a list of causes of death, they'll start with the first and second, which are cancer and heart disease. They won't mention medical mistakes. It goes right there down to the rest of them here because, after all, corporate media depends on advertising dollars from big pharma. And you can't go on out there and tell people that you know, they're taking their life in their hands every time they go into a doctor's office. Apparently, Pinterest has now banned Health Nut News for posting natural health information and vaccine safety info. They're really trying to shut it down. This one is going to be very hard for Big Pharma to explain. And this is coming out of Natural News, and it's about this McDowell family in Detroit, Michigan. And apparently, they had 3 children, triplets, Richie, Robbie, and Claire. All 3 children were vaccinated on the same day, and within hours, they all became severely autistic. So you think about that one for a while. It's just another racket to get your money. Another story from Natural News. Scientists who find glyphosate herbicide in common foods are silenced or reassigned. Now, obviously, when you buy a package of food, there's a list of ingredients, but you won't find glyphosate mentioned on there. But you should not be surprised that it's been used on non-organic fruits and vegetables. But apparently it's also made its way into a surprising number of popular foods. And the U.S. government scientists found glyphosate in foods like crackers, cornmeal, granola, cereal. The information wasn't publicized. It had to be pried loose through a Freedom of Information request. Now, for 2 years, the FDA has been testing food samples for glyphosate residues, but they have yet to release any results. Got to keep those corporations happy. It makes money. And as long as it makes money, it's a good thing. Like I mentioned to that caller earlier, I noticed on TV, Smirnoff, which is a manufacturer of vodka, is now running an ad campaign that they're only using GMO-free grains to make their vodka. Because obviously we don't know how much glyphosate would come through the distilling process for spirits that are made with GMO grains. Somebody has to find out, somebody in a lab. Try getting funding for that one here. Over in Tennessee, there was this, well, still is, this nurse practitioner, Christina Collins, 43. And at one point, she was once the 9th highest opioid prescriber in Tennessee. She was prescribing a patient 51 pills a day. And she routinely prescribed massive opioid dosages to patients she never actually examined. Now, the Tennessee Department of Health argued her prescriptions were so colossal their only reasonable use would be drug trafficking or suicide. But she got to keep her license. Collins was sentenced to 2 years of professional probation, but she continues to work at small clinics and nursing homes in the Knoxville area. Again, back to that Johns Hopkins study. You know, the opium crisis is real. The pharmaceutical corporations have a cheap source of opium, courtesy of the war in Afghanistan, and they're pushing those pills. They're definitely pushing those pills. Over in Great Britain, they've been handing out this drug called letrozole, and it's primarily used to treat breast cancer. Was prescribed 755,000 times last year in Great Britain. Apparently, it's only just now been discovered that this drug affects brain function and memory. Apparently, it targets the hippocampus. Another story, this from SHTF Plan. There's a major antitrust lawsuit against some large drug companies, and they're accusing Big Pharma of working together to raise the cost of generic drugs. Now, these drugs have had their prices increased recently by 1,000% or more. They're just raking in the dough. And as long as they go sharing the goodies with corporate media and the politicians, the situation is going to remain pretty much the same. But apparently, attorneys general for 45 of the 50 states, plus the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, are alleging that nearly 20 companies that manufacture generic drugs illegally collaborated with competitors to jack up the prices for those prescription medicines and divvy up the markets to limit competition. Okay. Now, Elizabeth Warren has come up with a plan. She thinks that the government should manufacture generic drugs to make sure that they're available to Americans at the best possible cost. I'm not sure how comfortable I am with that idea. I still remember what happened when the government thought it could run a telephone business and broke up the Bell Company into the baby bells. But something does definitely need to be done here. And I hope that lawsuit against those pharmaceutical companies does go forward. Another article, this one from ctrint.org, talking about more murders and murder-suicides committed by individuals on psychiatric drugs. And they're saying it's not just school-related acts of violence. There are 32 other acts of senseless violence committed by individuals taking or withdrawing from psychiatric drugs, resulting in 369 dead, 748 wounded. Big medicine is a scam, and they're just putting out these chemicals. Now, we've been talking a lot about aspartame, which, if you remember many years ago, was actually classed as a biological weapon used in high concentrations. It's an excitotoxin, which means if you are exposed to it, the neurons start firing in your brain. So it should come to nobody's surprise that there's a study published in the African Journal of Traditional Complementary and Alternative Medicine on the impact of aspartame consumption on neurotransmitters in rat brains. And the study fed these rats aspartame for durations of 10 to 40 days, then dissected the brains. And what they found out is that the neurotransmitters in the brains were depleted, which would make sense. If the nerves are firing constantly, they'll use up the available supply of neurotransmitters. And even more, they found that aspartame makes the brains vulnerable to chemical damage from food and vaccines, which means it's messing around with that blood-brain barrier. Another study, this one from Natural News here. Apparently, the study was published in the journal Environment International, confirmed that the antidepressant drug fluoxetine, commonly known as Prozac or Sarafem, directly causes multi-antibiotic resistance via genetic mutation. In other words, Prozac may be driving the antibiotic resistance crisis, and it is a crisis. There are so many strains of pathogens out there for which antibiotics won't work anymore. And Big Pharma is trying to come up with more and more powerful antibiotics, but they're already so powerful, they all have side effects. They all cause damage. Okay, over at the New York Times, they actually put out an article suggesting that human extinction would not be a bad thing because climate change is destroying the planet. Well, you can see basically the hatred for humanity there. You know, the earth will be so much better off without all you icky-poo human beings on it. Do you remember the remake they did of Day the Earth Stood Still? I thought it was horrible. You know, the first one was written when the United Nations was first getting started and people were very concerned about nuclear weapons. The remake of it starred Keanu Reeves, and it was all about, oh, we're coming to save the earth from you humans. I don't particularly want to go extinct. I'm opposed to the idea. But the New York Times may get their wish, at least to a degree, because apparently that Ebola epidemic in the Congo is still spreading. And there have now been confirmed cases of patients, contagious patients, getting into some of the larger cities. So that is an ugly situation. Alrighty, so following on that New York Times article, globalists are calling for a celebration of plunging human fertility as the war against humanity continues. So the UK Guardian basically published a story saying that declining birth rates of human babies is a cause for celebration. Okay, I want to know why the birth rates are declining. I mean, if the parents are making a decision because of the economy not to have kids, I'm perfectly okay with that. But what if there are other factors? Remember all these free vaccination campaigns that were being done in third world countries, and doctors there found out that the vaccines contained sterilization drugs. Remember the epicite gene? That was developed under a grant from the FDA and the USDA to create a corn, which when eaten, tricked your body into creating antibodies to human sperm, meaning you can no longer reproduce. Now, if that's gotten out into the wild, we're looking at a potential extinction level event. So I'm sure they're going to be celebrating over at the New York Times for that one. It's amazing how reckless these people are with the planet. And they're always out there saying, we care about the planet. We care about nature. We really want to take care of it. And then they botch it up really badly. I'm reminded of Michael Crichton's book, State of Fear. And in the middle of this book, which is about the human-caused global warming, rising sea level fraud, he has this character coming on in, talking about the history of Yellowstone Park and how time after time after time it got ruined. And there were no evil corporations in there exploiting the place. This was done by people who were convinced they knew what was best for nature, and they botched it up. And they're doing it all over again, but this time on a planetary scale. Okay. Over in Massachusetts, over at the Worcester School Community. Apparently, there was this mother, Jocelyn Goodall, who submitted the paperwork to the school district to homeschool her 8-year-old son. And apparently, the school district had police enter her home, handcuff her, and arrest her over what ultimately turned out to be a paperwork dispute. Because apparently the school district misplaced her lesson plan, which under Massachusetts law, you are required to submit. If you're going to homeschool your kid, we want to know what you're teaching them. You better be teaching them about the Holocaust and human-caused global warming. You better be teaching them that Oswald acted alone and that Arabs did 9/11. We want to control what your kids are thinking. Just because they're your kids, you don't have a right to tell them what to think or teach them anything we don't agree. This one is really well. New York officials have hosted a gun buyback, this one of toy guns. And they're saying that toy guns are now dangerous. They don't want to have children familiar with guns. Boy, I remember when I was a kid, you got toy guns for Christmas and birthdays. What a reversal. We got to take another break for commercials. Back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today here on Thursday. And yes, the Lady Claire will be joining us tomorrow on our last show before the New Year holiday. And this PC stuff is really getting out of control here. Story coming out of Oraz.com. And apparently Apple has now banned a Christian app. And according to an organization named Truth Wins Out, biblical teachings are considered too dangerous for the public marketplace of ideas. And apparently the complaints came from various homosexual groups who are upset that the Bible teaches that homosexuality is wrong. And they don't want anybody to who happens to be a Christian to get that. So Apple has now banned this Christian app. That's a First Amendment violation, I think. Google and Amazon are urged to follow suit. So they're liberalizing the world there. And apparently the app was produced by Living Hope Ministries and looks like it's going to be deleted. Now, as you know, I myself am not religious, but I think people who are have a right to believe what they believe. And I don't agree with this idea of hating homosexuals or anything, but I think that the gays are stepping across a line when they try and force their point of view back onto the Christian groups, the app. Whatever happened to live and let live as a guiding philosophy of life? I mean, really, especially among the liberals, it almost seems like they have this unshakable faith that their job is to run around the planet meddling in everybody else's life. Tell them what to think, how to dress, who to love, who to hate. And I reject that. I do reject that. Now, this one's a little funny. Over in New Jersey, apparently there was a school boy who was at home doing his homework, and apparently he was using Alexa to cheat on his winter break homework. And the mom actually got the video before yelling at him and said, "You're supposed to do your math homework without help." But apparently the boy was asking things like, "Alexa, what's 5 minus 3?" So it's creative, but again, unexpected aspects of having these devices in your home here. All right, last story of the day. Bryan Adams is out there expressing, he's a Canadian singer, and he's talking about all these new trade deals that will lengthen copyright terms to 70 years after the creator's death. And he's out there saying, how does that help the creator? who is already dead. This is all about enriching the publishers, the recording companies, the record labels, so that they can just go on making money long after these materials should enter the public domain. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. Please stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here, share it with everyone that you know. Talk to them. Bring back the art of the conversation. And emails, mailing lists, social media is totally compromised at this point. And please donate to Republic Broadcasting. They need it. Please donate to whatreallyhappened.com. We need it. We all thank you. And we'll see you tomorrow. Aloha, America.